Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, the St. Louis Blues have set an obscure NHL record, being the first team in NHL history to win 7 straight games after losing 8 games in a row. This season has been incredibly up and down. The Blues have been very streaky, but yet they find themselves in a playoff spot after everything that's happened. I'm going to be breaking down their recent game against the Anaheim Ducks, talking about the win streak as a whole, plus introducing a brand new segment. Haven't thought of a name for it yet, but should be fun either way. Should be a good episode. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you stay tuned.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, as always, Josh Hyman. If this is your first time tuning into the show, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for tuning in. Got tons and tons of episodes of this show in the bank. If you're here for the first time, like I said, you can check it out on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those good things. If you're returning, though, this isn't your first time, thanks for making Locked On Blues part of your daily routine, part of your first listen. Appreciate you. Let's just jump into today's episode. Got a lot to cover. This time, pretty recently, I said this time about like a week, 2 weeks ago, we were looking at the Blues being a potential last place in the NHL team. They had lost 8 games in a row. They were sitting at 3-8 on the regular season, had lost all 8 in regulation. First time in franchise history that they had lost that many games in a row in regulation. Jordan Kyrou was struggling immensely. Ryan O'Reilly was struggling. The offense was non-existent, nowhere to be found. And things were looking pretty dire. I myself had some pretty crazy reactions. Justifiably so, though. I think that the team looked very directionless. And now here we are, November 22nd, right before Thanksgiving. And they say, a lot of times a good indicator of which teams are going to make the playoffs are their standings during American Thanksgiving. Traditionally, teams that are in the playoffs when American Thanksgiving rolls around are, it's hard for them to lose that playoff spot and vice versa. If you're not in the playoff spot around American Thanksgiving, which is right around the quarter mark of that regular season, it's typically very difficult to climb out of that hole. We saw the Blues do it a couple years ago and they ended up winning the Stanley Cup, but it's a rare occasion. And looking at the standings a little recently, it seemed impossible. The Blues were sitting at 3-8-0. They only had 6 points on the season. It was looking like an extremely tall task for the Blues to be in a playoff spot at any point this season, much less American Thanksgiving. And now here we are. And the Blues are tied for the first wild card spot. Now, they are tied with Calgary, Edmonton, and Nashville, all at 20 points. But since the Blues, I believe, have games in hand on some of those bottom teams, they do technically have the playoff spot. So it's not a guarantee that they'll actually have it when Thanksgiving rolls around. However, it's looking pretty darn good. If you told me that the Blues would be in a playoff spot this quickly after losing 8 in a row in regulation, I would have been shocked. And here we are. So let's talk about how it happened. Before we get into the sort of the streak as a whole, I want to talk about the Anaheim game that was last night. St. Louis Blues matching up against the Anaheim Ducks on the road. Anaheim, not the greatest team, but still, no easy wins in the NHL, especially for the Blues, who have shown they very much know how to lose games this year. Got off to a rather quick start. Noel Acciari scored pretty much right off the opening faceoff, 11 seconds into the game for his 4th goal of the year. He joins an elite group. I think he is now 5th all-time or 4th all-time in terms of quickest goals to start a game in franchise history. So the Blues breaking all sorts of records, scoring that goal. And then later on in the first period, Cam Fowler scored on a wrist shot goal to tie the game up at 1. And then after that, it was pretty much a goaltending duel for the majority of the game. John Gibson always gives the Blues a lot of trouble. And that's why I was a little bit worried about the Anaheim game. It felt like even when Anaheim is a poor team, as they have been in the last few years, John Gibson is one of the best goalies on the planet, and the Blues especially have a hard time against him. Um, I think maybe one time recently they scored a bunch of goals on him, but other than that, I feel like he's always putting up 1 goal, 2 goal allowed performances against the Blues. So I was a little bit worried heading into the game, and that manifested itself. John Gibson did a really good job of shutting the door. The Blues struggled with shot generation there for a little bit after scoring the opening goal. I'm pretty sure they were outshot somewhat heavily in the first period. Let's see if I can pull that up. But overall, they did a good job of staying in the game and maintaining a somewhat control over the game. There were times where Anaheim pushed back, but in general, the Blues did a good job of showing that they were the better team for the most part. The shots in the first period were 15-9. So the Blues, again, like I said, struggled to generate shots. I'm pretty sure at one point they had only had like 3 shots on goal pretty decently into the period, including the one that went in. So it was tough there for a little bit, thinking the Blues might lose to the Ducks and snap their winning streak. But they did a good job of holding on. Anaheim had some decent chances. Jordan Binnington made some really, really nice saves. As he has been doing all year, he moves to 9-5 on the season. He has been really, really good. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more in the second and third segment. But overall, I think it's a good team effort by the St. Louis Blues to stay in sort of a boring, low-scoring game like it was. Hello, Kima, as my cat comes and hops down on my lap. See, if you're not on YouTube, you're missing out on some prime cat content. If you're a cat person, my cat's been running around the whole episode. So, anyways, Blues get a power play opportunity late in the game, putting on a ton of pressure. Power play was definitely hurting without Torrey Krug. It was evident, they were missing that one-time opportunity even more, and that their power play quarterback, with Torrey Krug not being out there. But Justin Falk did his best Torrey Krug impression with Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas connecting to slide it past Justin Falk, who slid it into a pretty wide open cage. There was a bit of a chaos scramble out front. And then Noel Achari scored his second goal of the evening with only 18 seconds left. So he scored 11 seconds in and with 18 seconds left. That was pretty funny there. I like that. Blues ended up winning 3-1. Good stuff. In this upcoming second segment, I'm going to be talking about wrapping up my thoughts on the game and then talking about the win streak as a whole before introducing a brand new segment. Like I said, make sure you stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. Should be fun. Before I get into that, though, I want to tell you guys about good friends over at Bet Online. Now, if you bet on the Blues to go on a 7-game win streak immediately after an 8-game losing streak, you'd probably have a pretty good reward sitting in your account at Bet Online. And if you don't want to miss out on any other bets like that in the future, you got to check out betonline.net. It is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football, basketball, hockey, soccer, World Cup, esports. Got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts like this one, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right, so the Blues lost 8 games in a row in regulation. They set a franchise record for most losses in a row in regulation. And then immediately after doing that, they won 7 games in a row. Became the only team in NHL history to win 7 games after losing 8 games in a row, I should say. An extremely inconsistent, streaky team to start the season, but the peak has been spectacular. 7-game win streak doesn't happen a lot. One of the longest in the NHL this year. apart from New Jersey, who's going on and, they've won like 12 or 13 in a row, something ridiculous like that at this point. And the Bruins have obviously won a ton of games, being 17-2. But the Blues have been just as impressive in their last 7 games, I would argue. Um, haven't lost any of them, obviously. They beat some tough teams along the way. They beat Vegas. They beat, Colorado, obviously. They've definitely won some tough games amongst this stretch. And it begs the question, which are the Blues good? It's a pretty simple question, but it's kind of the whole purpose of this podcast. Are the Blues good? And I guess I'm gonna try to answer that. No, I don't know. Look, I was saying it throughout the losing streak, and also throughout the winning streak, that I think the Blues. This is much closer to the version of the Blues that is accurate. I still don't think that the Blues are quite this good. I don't think they're a team that's going to steamroll every other team in the league and, Stanley Cup contender, juggernaut, whatever. I don't think that the best of the Blues we've seen this year is fully representative of them. I think that they've gotten not lucky, but this win streak is definitely kind of the regression to the, or the, I guess, the progression to the mean after that losing streak. It'll balance itself out. But there's been a lot of good things. You've seen Jordan Binnington have a career resurgence. He has been spectacular this year, making a ton of really tough saves, keeping the Blues in games. Thomas Greiss has been very good as well. The Blues have shown that they can win, games in many different ways. They've won, obviously that 5-4 game against Washington, which, yeah, they blew a lead, but at the same time, they held on, were able to win in a shootout, get the extra point. And then they're also able to win against John Gibson in a complete goaltenders duel. So we've definitely seen a lot of positives, and if you include the 3 wins that the Blues had to begin the season, they have shown that they can win in a variety of ways. They're not just a team that's going to go out there and has to score a ton of goals every single night, or is going to, make it impossible for you to score or whatever. They can win by scoring a lot of goals. They can win by playing good defense and having good goaltending. So the Blues, I think, overall are a hard team to beat. However, I still do think the Blues are in the boat where they could lose to pretty much any team. And you could say that about probably most teams in the NHL, but I'm almost looking at more of like from a playoff series perspective. Like, I don't think that there's, as of they're constructed right now, I don't know if there's a single playoff team out there where I would be like, oh yeah, the Blues have them easily. And that's true for most teams in the NHL. There are only a handful of teams where you would be able to say, oh yeah, they would walk whoever they face in the first round. Obviously Boston this year has been ridiculous. New Jersey has been on that crazy win streak. I don't know how much I buy into it, but they still look like a really legit team. Vegas looks really legit. So there are definitely some top tier teams that aren't quite, aren't quite, not bad enough, but aren't quite competitive enough with the rest of the league to say, like, it could go either way. Like, I think if you match Boston up against a team like, I don't know, the Rangers or Detroit, who's in like a playoff spot near the bottom of the league, I think that's pretty one-sided. But with St. Louis, I think it's definitely a matter of they're going to be fighting tooth and nail, whoever they're up against. But at the same time, I also think that they can beat any team in the league. I think the game against Boston's a great example. Obviously, they didn't win that game, but they could have. They were in it for a good chunk. They got outplayed, and they weren't the better team, but they were good enough to hang on. And they beat Vegas. They beat Colorado. Vegas only has 5 losses on the year. One of them is the St. Louis Blues. Colorado only has 6 losses on the year. One of them is the St. Louis Blues. So it's definitely a legit team there. And I think the Blues that we've seen lately, the Jordan Kyrou that we've seen lately, the Robert Thomas that we've seen, Justin Falk has honestly been the Blues MVP this year. Pavel Buchnevich has been on fire, winning, I think, second star of the week last week. The best players on the team, the guys that we were looking at, the veterans that we were saying, all right, they need to step it up. They have stepped it up. And I think that's been so crucial to the Blues' success lately. So, yeah, I mean, which Blues team are we going to see for the rest of the season? I don't know. That's going to be the question I'm going to answer in this third segment. And I'm going to tease a little bit here before heading into the ad break. This third segment, I haven't really officially named it yet, but I got the idea from Sean Woodley over at Locked On Raptors. Appreciate that. I thought it was a really fun idea. It's basically called something along the lines of which is more likely. You take two, sometimes three, but this time it's going to be two extremely different scenarios, extremely unlikely scenarios, and you say which one's going to happen. And this for this segment, third segment, it's going to be which is more likely: the St. Louis Blues win the draft lottery, or the St. Louis Blues win the Stanley Cup. I don't know. That's what I'm going to be debating in this third and final segment. Before I get into that, though, I want to tell you guys about a new sponsor, and that is called Simply Safe. If you've thought about securing your home with home security, but you've been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Blues listeners can order the #1 rated home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Over the holidays, property crimes like burglaries and package thieves spike nationally. That's why our friends over at Simply Safe Home Security are offering that 50% off their award-winning home security system. Simply Safe was named the best home security system of 2022 by US News and World Report. That is a third year in a row, back to back to back, a three-peat baby. Michael Jordan out here. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real so you can get priority police response. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/URL/slash locked on NHL today. This is their biggest discount of the year. So don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/locked on NHL. There is no safe like Simply Safe. And I'll be right back to wrap up today's episode with the third and final segment. All right, so I teased this heading into the break. What's more likely? The Blues win the Stanley Cup or the Blues win the draft lottery? Now, obviously, there's a caveat to that. If the Blues make the playoffs, they're obviously not going to win the draft lottery. So statistically, one is more likely than the other. But the overall question is, I think, is still good. Is maybe not even this year. How about let's expand this to the next few years. What's more likely in the next few years? The Blues win a draft lottery or the Blues win a Stanley Cup with an emphasis on this year. Let's just weigh things out here. Why? What are the concerns for the Blues? Why might they not be a true Stanley Cup contender? The offense has shown to be pretty inconsistent so far this year, going very, very quiet at times. Obviously that 8-game losing streak was awful, and a big part of that was the offense just not showing up for 8 straight games, pretty much. The defense is still underwhelming. Even in the best games for the defense, they've still looked like they leave something to be desired. And looking at some individual players, Ryan O'Reilly is only on pace for 36 points this year, which would be, I don't have his statistics in front of me, but I believe would be his lowest point total in a very long time. And by far his lowest point total as a member of the St. Louis Blues. Now, he has picked up his game a little bit lately. He hasn't quite been that he hasn't struggled quite as much. But still an area for concern there that the captain has definitely regressed offensively pretty significantly. Torrey Krug is injured right now. Colton Parayko has been dealing with some injury issues. Blues are having a hard time staying healthy. That's definitely a reason why you could look at them to struggle. And they're also, only in a wild card spot and could, potentially tomorrow be out of a playoff spot. Those are some of the reasons why I think, you could argue, yeah, they could very well miss the playoffs. Like, yeah, they've won 7 in a row, but we've seen the worst of this team. We've seen when this team is really struggling, and the Blues at their worst are definitely a team that could win the draft lottery this year. However, the flip side of that, what have we seen with the Blues at their best? The Blues at their best, like I've said in the last few segments, have beat some really good teams. They beat the Vegas Golden Knights. They beat the Colorado Avalanche. They beat, John Gibson when he was absolutely on fire. They beat the Washington Capitals in a game where they blew a big lead, and you could argue deserved to lose. Blues have had some really, really strong wins in the last few weeks. Jordan Binnington has been playing like an all-star. Vladimir Tarasenko has been having a spectacular year. Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas look like they completely deserve that $8.5 million contract they both got in the last few games. Blues have a very solid core. They have a lot of depth scoring. The defense is good enough to win games, and the goaltending has been very, very good. Excuse me. Plus, they have the experience factor. They won it in 2019. A decent amount of players from that team are still on the roster. Um, Obviously, Ryan O'Reilly was the leader in that. Robert Thomas didn't play in most of the games towards the end there, but he was still there for the playoff run. And Jordan Binnington obviously had a spectacular campaign there. So the Blues have the experience. And you know what they say about the NHL? All you got to do is get in. We've seen it with the Kings in 2012 or whatever, when they were the 8th seed and they went on and win 16 games and only lost 2 to win the Stanley Cup. And then obviously the Blues are a better modern example of that. So I'm going to answer the question: what is more likely? The Blues win the draft lottery this year, or they win the Stanley Cup? I'm going win the Stanley Cup. Do I think that means it's going to happen? No, but I think the good Blues team that we've seen is much more indicative of the team that we're going to see for the rest of the season than the worst of the Blues this year. But you might disagree with me. In terms of long term, what's more likely, winning the draft lottery in the next few years or winning a Stanley Cup? That might be a conversation for another day. That being said, though, if you guys disagree with me or agree with me, let me know on Twitter or whatever, or on the YouTube comments. Check out the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. You can check out Locked On Blues on Twitter, Instagram, at Locked On Blues. Obviously, you can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Thank you all so much for listening. Before you go, if you're looking for a second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. They got you covered with all the latest daily updates in the sports world. That being said, though, thank you all so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.